Hello, this is a review of Guardians of the Galaxy 3, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which came out last week. I saw it like Wednesday last week. Not fully a week ago, but it's been a couple days. It's been a couple days to digest. And honestly, the more I think about it, I had high hopes for this movie. We'll start out with what I was hoping for going in. I had high hopes for this movie, but as always with Marvel movies, especially like recently with Marvel movies, my hopes were like up here, off screen. You can't see my hand anymore. My expectations, I with Marvel, I always got to set my expectations lower because that's how I've managed to enjoy Thor. That's how I managed to enjoy Thor: Love and Thunder or Doctor Strange or like especially Thor: Love and Thunder. I think I set my expectations pretty low, and so it exceeded them. I haven't seen the Ant-Man. I haven't seen Ant-Man 3. That one got real bad reviews, so my expectations are pretty low for that. I'll probably watch that when it comes on Disney Plus and end up thinking it was fine because my expectations will be that it will be garbage. And I'll watch it and it'll be better than garbage and I'll be like, "Okay, cool." But this movie, I mean, with James Gunn at the helm, the director, the first two Guardians movie, Guardians is my favorite like MCU sub-series. I think it is the highest quality. I think Guardians 1 and 2, we talked about them a little on the Fear podcast recently, but I think Guardians 1 and 2 are both some of the strongest movies the MCU has to offer. And I was expecting something around the same level. Hopefully as good, or at least close to as good. What I hoped for was was best, like a genuinely great movie. Not that the first two aren't, but I was hoping for something that was. I was hoping for the best entry of the trilogy. I was hoping for the kind of great movie that isn't just great for a Marvel movie. Uh, Something like No Way Home. No Way Home was the last Marvel movie I really loved, but something that was, even better than that. Because, like, No Way Home was great, but also a lot of that greatness came from just, like, the hype of fan favorite characters. I have a bug bite on my leg, I think. On my foot, I think. It's pretty itchy. Sorry, this is the stuff I should cut out. But, so basically, I expected something as good, maybe a little worse than the previous two Guardians movies, which still would have been, better than a lot of Marvel's output lately. I hoped for something that exceeded even the Guardians movies. I hoped for something genuinely great. Because that was just the feeling that, when you watch a movie's trailers and you just get the feeling that it's going to be something really, really special? I hoped for that, but I didn't dare expect it. I'm glad to say that not only were my expectations met, but my hopes, my up here, pie in the sky hopes were met as well. Guardians 3 is my favorite movie in the Guardians trilogy, and possibly my favorite movie in the entire MCU franchise, which is crazy, because I feel like if this is the MCU's swan song, if this is their last, like, great movie, I'm okay with that. James Gunn put out something really, really incredible with this one, and I'm telling you right now, don't let the, like, middling reviews of the last, like, several Marvel movies, don't let even my own previous reviews of recent Marvel stuff in the last year make you not go see Guardians 3. It lives up to it all. The Rocket storyline that they've teased in the trailers is phenomenal. Genuinely some of the most, like, serious, emotional, like, best acting in the MCU. Not just great for the MCU, but just, like, great voice work and performances in general. The villain's performance is great, up there with, like, Thanos. Marvel's tried to make Kang all the rage lately, but I mean, this Guardians villain, I mean, I haven't seen Ant-Man, so I don't know if he's better than Kang, but word on the street is, it's the villain. The villain is played by one of the actors from Peacemaker, which was the last James Gunn project, and that's part of why I had high hopes, because James Gunn has been on a killer run lately. There's the first two Guardians movies, which are obviously, some of my favorite MCU movies, but then there's his work at DC, the Suicide Squad, and especially the spin-off show Peacemaker, which is genuinely probably my second favorite, which is genuinely, I think, my second favorite superhero show. Only The Boys beats out Peacemaker for me. So James Gunn and now James Gunn's going to be running DC, which Marvel can't be happy about that. James Gunn just got Marvel their best movie in years, possibly their best movie period, and now he's jumping ship to their competitor. This has only made me more excited for DC's offerings in the future, because if they're all as good as Guardians Volume 3 was, DC could become the new MCU in terms of superhero popularity, because the MCU mid Marvel's kind of falling off. But this movie did not fall off. And it's rare. It's rare for a third movie in a trilogy to be the best one. Usually the third movie is where things start to falter. I mean, Shrek the Third comes to mind. But this movie just really, I feel like it had all the strengths of the first two, plus so much more. Even Rocket's storyline aside, because Rocket kind of has his own short movie within the movie going into his backstory. We get several flashback scenes involving him, but all the rest of the characters get their time to shine. I kind of thought going in that it was going to be a Rocket movie, and the rest of the Guardians would kind of be second. Kind of like how Guardians 2 really focuses a lot on Peter Quill and doesn't give as much time to the other characters. I kind of thought this was going to be like that, but with Rocket. That, okay, Rocket gets time. Maybe Peter Quill will also get time dealing with his, Gamora baggage. But that's going to be it, they're going to be the focus. But this Guardians movie does a better job than any of them at giving every single member their time. Even Kraglin, the Sean Gunn's character who inherited Yondu's head arrow thing, gets his own little arc in here. Every character really does get their time. Adam Warlock, which is a new introduction in this movie, he's not as big of a part as you might have thought based on... So Guardians 2's big post-credits scene was teasing Adam Warlock. So you'd think he would have been... I've heard some people say they wish he was in the movie more. But I feel like they used him excellently, because even he got an arc. There just wasn't room for him to be a central focus point. Because this movie's already long. It's only 2.5 hours long, and I will say I think this is the one flaw, the one thing holding it back from being perfect for me, is that it does feel a little it's 2.5 hours long, and it feels 3 hours long. It feels longer than it actually is, which is normally kind of a deal breaker for me with movies, but the parts that drag are made up for by the parts. And there's no one definable subplot that I'm remove that. That's what makes the movie drag. Compared to Guardians 2, where there's the whole taser face, there's a clear B plot in Guardians 2 that makes that movie too long. The most unnecessary thing in this movie, honestly, is Adam Warlock, because it's very much a movie focusing on the core Guardians team, and there wasn't really time to fully implement Adam Warlock into that. So instead, James Gunn kind of just went funny mode with him, which I have zero issues with. I feel like he was handled. He's very funny. Adam Warlock is the funniest part of the movie. He's just this. You might have seen the memes about him, but he's just every scene he was in, I was cackling. He's very like big dumb himbo that flies into things and crashes, and it's awesome. I love what they did with him. I would like to see him more. I hope with future. If there's a Guardians 4, they set Adam Warlock up to be like a more prominent character if they ever make more Guardians movies. Which I doubt they will for a long time. I think this one sets the bar so high that without James Gunn to work on anymore, that's the other thing that's really satisfying about this movie, and I'll go a bit more in depth into it later. But this is a Marvel movie with a real ending. It's not spending all its time trying to set up future stuff. Adam Warlock is the most they ever is the one character that feels like a setup for him to be used in the future later, but he's used just the right amount. James Gunn was he was smart enough to not overshadow the other Guardians or take time away from them in order to like hype up Adam Warlock. Adam Warlock is not hyped up in this movie. He's kind of treated like a big bit. He's kind of a big joke, which I'm sure will make some Adam Warlock fans mad. But I don't care. I don't care about Adam Warlock from the comics. I care about the Guardians that we've spent 2 movies with, and this movie does an amazing job of like giving them all their time to shine. That's why the movie is as long as it feels as long as it is because it does like you could probably tell the plot of this movie is pretty simple, and you could probably tell this story in an hour and a half if you cut out all the character moments. But the character moments are like what makes Guardians what it is. That's the character moments, the like soundtrack beats, the arcs, and each character goes through such a satisfying arc. I guess I'll like get into it a little more now. If you don't want spoilers, click off now and go watch the movie. Like actually just go watch the movie because it's incredible. It's the best movie of the trilogy in my opinion. Trying to think of any other non-spoiler thoughts. I have to say it's the best movie of the trilogy. It gives all their characters the most time. Adam Warlock is very funny. Rocket's arc is great. What they do with Gamora is probably, without going into spoilers, the least satisfying part of the movie, but I also feel like it was done the best that it could. That Gamora is the one part of the movie that requires, like, the Guardians trilogy works pretty well separated from the rest of the MCU. You can pretty much watch it without watching other Marvel movies. Gamora's inclusion in this movie is the one thing that ties back into those Avengers movies, Infinity War, Endgame, because if you don't remember, in Infinity War, Gamora died. But in Endgame, when they were doing their time travel shenanigans to, like, bring everyone back, Gamora from the past came with Thanos to the present and kind of just stuck around, which I feel like was the Avengers writers throwing James Gunn a bone, like, hey, we're sorry we killed off your character in our movie. Here, you can use her in this way. But I honestly kind of wish they had just actually... I wish she had just stayed dead. I wish they didn't throw that bone to James Gunn because I don't think he needed it. And I think the Gamora and Peter Quill stuff in this movie is good, but it's the most like I feel like a perfect vision for this would have just kept her dead, because a lot of Peter Quill's arc in this movie is about dealing with the loss of her and dealing with loss in general, and her being there in this movie doesn't. They found a way to write it as best as they could where like her being in this movie doesn't cheapen his arc. Because they make it, like, she doesn't go through the Loki TV show transformation of becoming the version of her that we knew from the other movies after, like, 10 minutes of hanging out with the Guardians. She's still, they make it pretty clear this is not the same Gamora that we had in the first 2 movies. And honestly, that's fine with me. I just feel like they didn't really need her at all, but that's not, like, James Gunn's. They threw him that bone. I get why he didn't just write her out after them saying, hey, she's alive again. Those are really my only criticisms, the length and Gamora. And now I'm just going to start gushing about the movie now. So, if you didn't already click off 3 minutes ago, we're getting into spoilers. Let's do it. Start right from the beginning. We get Rocket Raccoon singing freaking Creep by Radiohead, which is kind of cheesy, but works wonderfully with, like, him singing Creep and being very alone and very, like, down. And, like, the Guardians movies are always so great with using music to, like, convey the character's mental states. And this one is no exception. Him singing Creep at the beginning parallels so wonderfully with the 2000s movie dance party end scene that they basically have in this movie. The best of its kind, easily. Where they're listening to... I'll get into that. We'll just go in order. Rocket Raccoon listening to Creep. It pairs very well with the end of the movie. And then Adam Warlock shows up, and you get him flying in. They just cut straight from a scene with the Guardians to like him. No like setup, just as he's flying through space. Another awesome music cue that is my new like favorite. It's like meme clip. It's me approaching you rapidly. It's a very funny moment. It sets the tone well for what we're gonna get with Adam Warlock's character throughout the movie, because he pretty much spends the rest of the movie just abruptly flying into scenes and causing extra chaos, and it's wonderful. So he shows up, he tries to nab Rocket, Rocket gets hurt, and then our mission for the movie is we gotta go save Rocket. We gotta go, like, and in doing so, delve into his backstory, meet the villain, the High Evolutionary who experimented on Rocket, made him essentially who he was. And that subplot is oof. I mean, you know it's gonna be like an emotional ringer, but the scene where all of Rocket's, again, spoilers, we're in spoiler territory. The scene where all of Rocket's friends die in front of him. Rocket's scream after Lila the Otter gets shot by the High Evolutionary in front of him, just with a regular pistol, too. He wasn't even using, like, a space laser gun. It was just a regular pistol. That scene was incredibly grounded. I'm like, that subplot's material in particular is, like, dark stuff. I mean, like, if you're uncomfortable with, like, animal cruelty stuff in movies, that's what this subplot is. It's like it's grim. It's not funny. It's very grim, and it's treated with the appropriate seriousness that a plotline like that should be. And in general, this is probably the most serious Guardians of the Galaxy movie. What they did with Adam Warlock works so well because he's pretty much just there to provide like a source of levity, to provide like something more overtly comedic into an otherwise much more serious and thoughtful Guardians movie, much more emotional. The Guardians movies always had moments of that. That's James Gunn's strength, is these like silly, wacky characters with real emotional heart. And this movie really leans into that. Like, you see Peter Quill grieving over Gamora's loss. You see him struggling to deal with the fact that Gamora is back once she rejoins them to help them with this mission, and she's with the Ravagers now. She's got a whole new group. She's a whole different person. Nebula and Gamora basically switch roles within the group, where, like, Nebula is now a full member of the team, and she's the one who's kind of, like, there to support everybody as much as she can. And Gamora's the, like, angry kind of, I'm not a member of your team. You guys, leave me alone, like, character. And it's really interesting to see that dynamic flipped. I think I said earlier the Gamora subplot was unnecessary, and I do kind of, like, I still kind of wish she did. So, like, she didn't need to be in this movie, but this is also probably the most interesting Gamora has ever been. Her resolution just wasn't as satisfying as the others, because she doesn't end up with them at the end. She goes back to her Ravager crew, and I feel like that was handled well, where they didn't just rope her in like nothing had ever happened. They were like, yeah, she's alive, but She's not the same person. She didn't go through the same things. She left Thanos at a different point. She didn't leave Thanos like the original Gamora did. She basically got abandoned after the Avengers killed him. Like, it's a very, very different play, and I appreciate that they went that way with it instead of just, even if it was kind of unsatisfying in the moment, I appreciate that they went that way with it instead of just Loki season 1, having her, like, learn everything about her past life and be like, okay, well, I guess that's who I am now. Because that was one of my issues with Loki, is him, like, watching Infinity War and Endgame, basically, and being like, well, I guess I'm a good guy now, kind of, mostly. Like, Gamora, at the end of this movie, she's no longer openly hostile towards the Guardians by the end, but she's still not the Gamora they knew. She's part of a different group now, and I think that's, I don't know, it's a good, like, it's like, sometimes love happens at the right place in the right time, and then you put that in the wrong place at the wrong time, and even if it should work, even if the two people should work together, the situation changes it. And I do buy that, because I feel like even in the first two Guardians movies, Peter Quill and Gamora never gave, like, life bond, like, pure, unbreakable, galaxy-spanning love vibe. They gave more of, like, two people who just happen to be together, who just, happen to fall right place, right time kind of thing. And I feel like that this movie did that well with the Guardians, of showing, like, their team is not some, like, destiny-fated hero crew. It's a ragtag group of misfits bonded together because they're all kind of running from something, running from trauma in their past. And that's at the end of this movie. I think we all thought they were going to kill off several characters. I mean, they almost kill off a lot of characters. There's a moment where you think Drax is going to die. Rocket's practically on his deathbed for half the movie. Peter Quill has a moment that actually got me at the end, where he leaves his Zune on the spaceship and goes running back for it and ends up stuck out in space. Like, I was like, he is dead. He's gotta be. Like, there's no way. And then Adam Warlock. That was the Adam Warlock payoff is so good, because he spends the whole movie just smashing shit. And then at the end, and it's not like out of nowhere either, because you can see Adam Warlock's basically a pod baby in this movie. And you can see him kind of, like, considering moral questions on his face of, like, should I be working for these people? What should I do? He basically loses his mother midway through because he can't save her from the High Evolutionary blowing up the planet. So then to get that payoff at the end of the movie of he does something heroic too, and he saves Peter Quill in a moment that both works perfectly for his arc in this movie and is also hilarious. The fact that they mirrored the, like, Adam's creation, Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel painting is so good. That's so funny. Like, even that moment is like a laugh out loud funny moment. Enough about Adam Warlock. Enough about Giga Chad Sigma male Adam Warlock. The rest of the characters, death flags. They threw up a lot of death flags, but didn't actually kill anybody off. And that's not a criticism. If anything, I'm incredibly impressed by how naturally they did the breaking the Guardians up for an ending without actually killing them off. Like, they pointed out that all of the Guardians are essentially brought together by their past traumas they don't know how to deal with. And this movie basically ends with them breaking off to process their traumas. Like, there's a new Guardians team, and Rocket heads the new Guardians team, because this whole movie is Rocket processing his trauma. Like, the High Evolutionary is Rocket's trauma. So then the ending's so good, which is good because I feel like the part where it drags is the middle, where we're trying to defeat the High Evolutionary and save Rocket, where they do the trope of party members getting separated and then the main group of characters having to go rescue the side group of characters. They do that one too many times. And that's where I actually looked at my phone, like, how long has this movie been going? There's a bit there that drags. You'll probably know it when you get there, or if you've already seen the movie. It's when like half of the group gets separated again, and it's like, okay, we're doing this again. That's always been so. I can't do if a movie does group gets separated and one hero has to rescue the other hero. If a movie does that more than like twice, I check out for that part of the movie because I'm like, okay, well now they're gonna go rescue them for the third time. I don't need to pay attention to this part. And this movie does that. That's the probably the biggest flaw. But then after that, the conclusion is so good because what's so good about it is that the Guardian, it really shows their full development into heroes. Not cheesy hero's journey like Destiny here, but like Guardians of the Galaxy. People who help other people and save people and animals, even when they don't need to. Because the High Evolutionary ship is basically already crashing in the last act of the film. Like, he's going to go down with the ship. His whole crew has betrayed him because he's obsessed with catching Rocket. And, like, the Guardians could just leave. There is a point in the third act where the Guardians could just leave. They could just grab their friends, get with it. They've already saved Rocket. They've done what their mission was. They could just go. They could just go and let the High Evolutionary probably die. But they save everyone. Not just the children, but the animals, too. They put their lives at risk. And that's how Peter Quill almost dies, leaving. To save the High Evolutionary's victims and beat the hell out of him. The final fight scene is so satisfying. They ping-pong combo the High Evolution. And this movie has good action choreography and direction. And I mean, James Gunn's direction. But more than that, good action choreography. The hallway fight scene with No Sleep Till Brooklyn playing in the background, I was like, what? Marvel movies haven't had a Marvel movie scene with good action choreography? Like, what's going on? The best action choreography in the MCU probably since, like, Civil War, like, since pre-Infinity War Endgame. Nothing in Infinity War Endgame, fight-wise, was quite as well shot and directed as that sequence. Wow, it was a wowing sequence. A wowing sequence from an action standpoint. This movie isn't just a, like, emotional character story or a goofy comedy. It's also a great, like, sci-fi action space adventure, just like the first two films in the franchise. And they really show that with several of these fights. There's other fight sequences early in the movie that are also really fun and impressive, but if I went into all of them, we'd be here all day. This video's already almost 30 minutes long, because, yeah, I have a lot to say about this movie because it's great. The ending, like, post the final battle, post killing the High Evolutionary, post ripping his face off, which is a great detail. I didn't necessarily connect it when I was in the movie theater, but I kind of put it together later. After the High Evolutionary kills Rocket's friends, he, like, claws the heck out of the High Evolutionary's face. And then that character in the present day has, like, a fake face mask that is his face, and that they rip that off at the end. And it's like, oh, he replaced his face? Because basically this villain's whole motivation is like, I need the perfect universe. I'm like a eugenicist. Perfect eugenicist creates species and destroys them when they're not perfect anymore. Excuse me. Horrible. Least sympathetic. Completely unsympathetic motherfucker of a villain. When he mocks Rocket's, like, crying after Lila... And my God, Rocket's scream after Lila's death. I mentioned it earlier, but I felt it in my whole body. Ugh. I'm just like, as I talk about these scenes, I'm transported back into them. So this review's all over the place. But he really, the actor whose name I cannot pronounce, who played the High Evolutionary, does a great job with, like, this cold, calculated villain who clearly has, like, an ego complex. His ego is threatened by Rocket's mind. That's why he wants Rocket Raccoon. That's why he sent Adam Warlock to steal Rocket. That's essentially the inciting incident of the film. And you can tell just how much it angers the High Evolutionary that he can't get his hands on Rocket, that Rocket is continuing to outsmart him. And that's really what leads to his downfall. Like, they don't kill him at the end, but they leave him on the ground in his burning spaceship, faceless and utterly humiliated, which I'm of the opinion is actually like killing him would have been merciful for such an awful villain. Like, that's not necessarily the point the movie was going for when they didn't kill him, but I think it's kind of like that's how I interpret it. Is like, I'm like, killing him would have actually been merciful compared to leaving him alive with his face ripped off, just lying there in utter like shame and defeat. Sometimes it's better to leave the villain alive after you punk the hell out of them, because it gives them time to process, to sit there and process just how badly they have lost. And it's such a satisfying beat down of a villain, because he's one of the most hateable villains in MCU history. Because he's one of the best written villains in the MCU, one of the best performed. The best villain of the Guardians trilogy, which Ego was already a pretty great villain in Guardians 2. So that's high praise. High evolutionary praise, because that's the villain's name. We're going to talk about the end party dance scene now, because I'm tired of talking. And I want to get to my final points. There's the end party dance scene is what really, like, nothing like a good ending of a movie to make you review over the whole thing that you've seen, and rather than pull out those flaws that I've already mentioned earlier, just really appreciate what you've watched. And this movie does it great. Each of the Guardians either leaves or sticks around. You know, they decide to process their respective traumas. Nebula kind of learns to open up, realizes maybe she is too much of an angry, mean person sometimes, and like lets go of that. She lets go of that burden. Mantis leaves to go, like, you know, find more of herself, basically. Hers is the least clear arc, but she was just a good character to begin with. So, and I feel like she's used well with the other characters in this movie. That's what the part I was talking about where it drags is where Drax, Mantis, and Nebula get separated from the rest. But what that part does do for the movie is give those three characters character moments. It gives Drax Drax is the weirdest one, because I was watching most of the movie kind of feeling like they made him too stupid again. Kind of like, because his art, if you remember in Guardians 1, Drax is not really dumb. He comes from a culture that is very literal and doesn't understand metaphors, and he's like all serious, all out for revenge. And I feel like the movies after that kind of made him more stupid, which was always which this movie seems like it's doing for a lot of it. But then it makes this really good, it draws this really unexpected conclusion for him that also makes perfect sense. Is when Drax, Mantis, and Nebula get stranded on the high evolutionary ship, they're with a bunch of kids. They're with a bunch of kids that he was taking to his next planet to, like, start his next, you know, fake Earth planet. And you realize that, like, Nebula is just yelling at the kids. That's not helping. Mantis is trying to communicate with the kids, but is too awkward about it, and Nebula and Mantis are kind of getting at each other. And then Drax comes in and he goes dad mode, and that's when it's like, oh, he's himbo dad. Duh, of course he's himbo dad of the group. I feel like we lost that aspect of him at some point throughout his appearances in Infinity War, Endgame, Guardians 2, but we got that back here. At Guardians 3, we're like, right, that's his and so, like, he finds a purpose in that, of, like, this dadhood. Rocket finds a purpose in being the new leader of the Guardians. Peter Quill returns home to, like, reunite with his grandfather, who he left behind as a child after his mother died. So he's going back to process his, like, childhood trauma. Gamora returns to her, like, they all just have these great resolutions. And it's all it's capped off with the wonderful scene in which the remaining members who are still, like, around. Hello, dog that walked into my room. Goodbye. I'm not done recording this review yet, somehow. It's capped off with this wonderful end dancing. There's a dog in the movie. There's a talking dog in the movie named Cosmo. The dog is cute. Honestly, probably one of the more unnecessary characters in the movie, but still, like, fun. Her and gives Kraglin someone to play off of, because they're kind of separate from the rest of the Guardians for most of it. But anyway, that end scene, the end dance party scene that I've been trying to get to talking about for 10 minutes, but I keep getting distracted by my own stream of consciousness thoughts. It's so... Rocket looking at the Zune, the old music player machine that basically the pre-iPod, early 2000s tech, and seeing that like Quill has added a playlist of 2000s songs on there, and he leaves the Zune behind for Rocket, and then Rocket starts the awesome dance party sequence to "Dog Days Are Over" by Florence and the Machine, Florence and the Machine is probably one of my favorite female-led bands, honestly. And hearing their song at the end of this movie is just awesome. It's such a satisfying like cap off. I could make a whole little video about this end scene and about how like the lyrics of the song hold so much meaning for like the character. It feel like in this context, the song represents all of the Guardians being done running away from their traumas, running away from their past, and accepting their heroes' journeys are complete, and they're like, some of them need to leave and go process their own traumas, but some of them, like Rocket and Nebula, Rocket, Nebula, and Drax are the big ones that get the focus in the dance scene. And it's because they are the three big characters who really like the dog days are over. Their trauma that they've carried with them for all of these movies has like they're able to let go. It's a movie about letting go, really. Peter Quill has to learn to let go of Gamora. Rocket and Nebula and Drax have to learn to let go of their past. Like, that's what the movie is about. And that's where I'm like, okay, this movie's not just like great, a lot of fun, or great like for an MCU movie. It's just a beautiful story about, and a beautiful conclusion to a trilogy that really like wraps up the characters' arcs, even the ones who it wasn't clear if they really had arcs before this point. It's like that's what it was always about. The Guardians was always about letting go of the burden of the shackles of the past and breaking the chains, to use the song that was in the Guardians 2 conclusion, and like moving on. And it mirrors perfectly, like I said earlier, with Rocket singing Creep at the beginning, clearly still haunted by his trauma and his past, and Rocket at the end, and Drax at the end finally dancing, Nebula smiling for the first time in any of these movies, really, and just like cheering, and everybody cheering. The dance party ending trope has never been, and probably never will be, more beautifully utilized to sum up not just a film, but a like trilogy of films. I'm getting emotional just talking about it. People say it didn't make me cry, but that's because I have weird emotional reactions to things. I may not have cried, but I felt cry type emotions pass through my full body with that movie several times. In the end, different kinds. Like the end of the movie, I think is a happy tears kind of part. Whereas like Rocket, diving into Rocket's backstory, that's a like sobbing tears of sadness kind of part. And I mean, how many other Marvel movies are genuinely like tear-inducing? The last one I've heard people talk about crying during was Black Panther 2, but even that has less to do with the content of the movie itself and more to do with the real life Chadwick Boseman's death. I'm not sure Black Panther 2 would really be a tearjerker movie if it didn't have that real world context behind it. This movie just does dole out those emotions and doles them out wonderfully. And here we are at almost 40 minutes of me talking about the best trilogy that Marvel has, this golden trilogy of movies residing within the larger MCU. I'm confident that, the MCU will fade, it will fall. I feel like it's already in its like downward arc until eventually it loses relevancy. But this movie and this trilogy will be remembered as like the way Star Wars is remembered nowadays. Not the way Star Wars is handled nowadays. The way Star Wars is remembered as like this great like sci-fi science fantasy like space opera franchise. I found a great quote from James Gunn on his Twitter about when he was first like it was like the 10-year anniversary of him being pitched Guardians as a project, and he was saying that after having this project pitched to him, he wanted to make something. I believe the quote is that he wanted to make something that wasn't like Star Wars, but that made audiences feel the way, that could make audiences feel the way that he felt about Star Wars as a kid. And I feel like that's a wonderful, like that's the legacy that Guardians has. It's not like Star Wars at all. It's very, very different. But I think for the current generation that is growing up with Marvel movies and growing up with these movies, new Star Wars movies are not their like sci-fi, their awesome sci-fi franchise. Guardians is the awesome sci-fi franchise, wedged in to this larger MCU as a whole, but largely separate from it, with the except when you really to watch the Guardians movies and get the full context of them, you don't have to watch any other MCU movies besides the Guardians trilogy and Infinity War and Endgame. I feel like you watch all of those movies, you don't 10, 20 years from now when the MCU is dead and gone, you don't need to go back and watch every MCU movie to appreciate the Guardians trilogy. You really just need to watch the Guardians movies and Infinity War and Endgame if you feel like it. And those are both also, I think Infinity War is also probably Infinity War is one of the top MCU movies as well. So that's not even really, Endgame is the only one that's not, and even Endgame's fine. But it's like, I'm just so glad that these Guardians movies exist and that they weren't marred down by Disney overlord influence, and that James Gunn was allowed to tell the wonderful story that he has told. I'm very excited to see what future wonderful stories he tells over at DC. I think I've talked about this for long enough. Go see Guardians 3. If you have any love for the first two films at all, you've got to see Guardians 3. And even if you don't, you should watch the whole trilogy if you haven't seen them already. They're kind of the only MCU sub-series that I would recommend watching, even if you don't care about Marvel. The dog days are over, the horse is coming, so you better run. Arrivederci. I'm going to be thinking about the movies now. Goodbye. The button didn't work. I'm going to be thinking about these movies for a while now. Goodbye.